Om. 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 Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahe Tejasvinavadhi Tamastu Ma Vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Thank you very much, Kiran Bhai. Namaste, dear friends.
Can't hear you, Karuna.
Is that better, Kiran Bhai? Can you hear me?
I can hear you quite clearly.
You can hear me clearly. Okay, Kiran Bhai, probably it's your device. So namaste to all dear friends. I'm Karuna Mohan, for those of you who don't know me. I'm a member of the Executive Committee of the Arya Pratinidhi Sabha, and I work in the Ved Niketan Standing Committee, which is responsible for publications, public lectures like this one, and the graded examinations in Hinduism. I was appointed to moderate this year's lectures to enable us to consolidate the outcomes and share them widely. This year, we commemorate 100 years of the APS. And in the Back to the Veda lectures, we are busy with lectures of this sort so that we replace the need to have a physical conference. So each lecture that we've had is organized under the theme, the overall theme of the past, the present, and the future. While we celebrate the 100 years of our existence, it is important for us to plan ahead and look at the next 100 years. But it's equally important to look at the past and see what we've learned. And so we're hopping up and down between the past and the present. And, we're also looking at the Arya Samaj 150 years of existence internationally. Now, the Arya Samaj was formed to be a democratic organization. The founder was just an ordinary member. The Arya Samaj itself developed a number of freedom fighters in India, like Pandit Gurudev Vidyarthi, Pandit Lekram, Swami Shraddhanand, and Lala Lajpat Rai, to name a few. Swami Dayanand Saraswati was the first to declare there was a need for self-rule, Swarajya, and he advocated very strongly that a foreign king should never rule another country. He explained that Swarajya was a new dawn, and he went back to the Vedas and communicated to people about democracy, freedom of expression, and some of these things are still relevant and they're deep concerns that we face today. Swami Dayanand was also the first to oppose the salt tax that the British imposed, and his views on politics, democracy, and the beautiful coordination of religion and politics are explained in the Satyarth Prakash in the Raj Dharma chapter. Members of the Arya Samaj have been involved in the struggle for liberation from colonial rule in India, in Guyana, and other parts of the world. Today, we have Professor Ashwin Desai, who is going to share his views on the Arya Samaj and the struggle for liberation in South Africa. Ashwin Bhai, of course, needs no introduction. He's recognized as one of South Africa's leading social commentators. His research focuses on sociology of sports, social identity, and social movements. He's the director of the Center for Social Change at the University of Johannesburg. He's lectured at UDW, the then UDW, the Workers' College, and at Rhodes University. I first met Ashwin in 1980 during the 1980 boycotts in the student movement. And I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that he was an independent thinker and a brilliant mind then. And now he's graduated to the wisdom group of leaders. So without saying too much more, I'd like to hand over to Ashwin to share with you his views. Thank you. Ashwin Bhai, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I really am so touched by the fact that the way the Arya Samaj has embraced somebody like me and allowed me the chance to be part of them and to have a platform to speak to them and to listen. And the 100-year celebration was an incredible occasion for many of us. We feel proud to be at the Kendra. And it really, at a time when there's so much negativity, it uplifted our spirits. And I think we all thank the Arya Samaj for it. If you think about the sociology of religion, it tries to show that how these structures work, how often orthodoxy, rather than liberating the mind, imprisons it. Marx, said, one states that religion is the opium of the people. He was trying to think about, he wrote actually very positively about capitalism as an imaginative system, probably the most progressive system in human history. But he thought that religion itself and the way it became co-opted into prevailing structures did not allow for those forms of imagination. It encased you in a deep spirituality and felt that it was more navel-gazing. Of course, religion was also used to propagate a particular system. Max Weber wrote about, he was wanting to understand why India and China were so much more advanced than Europe, but Europe overtook China and India. And he wanted to say and argue through his book on the Protestant ethic and the rise of capitalism that Christianity strategically changed the way it thought about its religion. Christianity argued that you were predestined to enter the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of hell. But what the Protestant ethic did, it changed that to suit the new capitalist values and commodified values of the time. It said that you can see signs in somebody whether they were destined to enter the kingdom of heaven. And those signs would be that you must listen to your boss, you must be punctual to work, the richer you are, the closer you are to God. And so often the religious texts were used for a particular individual form of ideology. And so we come into discussing the role of religion in its broader expanse around all these prevailing theories. And as you know, often, even with Martin Luther taking on the Catholic Church, they were finally brought back into the fold, and the Catholic Church maintains its spine. And so there's always a deep struggle that's going on inside of religion and how people think about it. And I come to this with this, it's often when you read books, you read them when you're young, you read them in middle age, and you read them like me now as a pensioner, and you get so much of difference from the text. And, I really, Herman Hesse published it in 1922, and it was finally published in English in 1951. But in a wonderful introduction to the book, this is what it says. Siddhartha's journey may be plotted as a long succession of abandoned doctrines and renounced dogmas. Everyone around him believes him destined to mature into an all-star Brahmin, the Tiger Woods of Hindu theology. But unfulfilled by scriptures and discourse, he walks away from the guaranteed success in the religious arena. Later, he also spurns an opportunity to hang with the Buddha, the Sublime One, obviously not knowing and not caring which side his bread is buttered on. Siddhartha turns orthodox Hinduism inside out, flicks the translucent lint from Buddha's much contemplated navel, and deserts the extremist Samanas with whom he's starving himself in the forest, becoming increasingly convinced that a true seeker could not accept doctrine. Finally, the seeker even rejects seeking, concluding that ultimate reality can never be captured in a net made of thought, and knowing has no worse enemy than the desire to know. Lest his ongoing rebellion smacks of impudence or even nihilism, it can be reported, without giving away too much to the first-time reader, that Siddhartha's litany of no leads him to one resounding yes. He thrashes this, he touches that, only to arrive in acceptance of the all. In the end, even mankind's nervous, proud little ego is no longer despised as the worst enemy, but is rather accepted as just another piece of foolishness to be applied and affectionately and calmly observed. In many ways, in reading Siddhartha, the work of the Arya Samaj in South Africa, because what were the Samaj's spine? It was preaching against caste. It was bringing women into the fold, where women and men could do a havan. It was starting to question rituals. It was taking people back to the Vedas. And in this context, 1960 becomes so crucial, because I don't know how many of you have come across the publication that was put out, Hinduism in South Africa in 1960. It is a stunning piece of work. Articles by Pandit Vedalanka on the four Vedas is an incredible intellectual intervention in the debates about how we think about spirituality and religion. One of the key quotes I can give you from that publication: it is the duty of people to apply the knowledge contained in the Vedas according to the special needs of the community or to the circumstances obtaining at a particular time. It is an article filled with the forms of imagination that we wouldn't normally associate with a Pandit. There's one that really struck me. He writes, we mustn't think of God as all-powerful. We must think about God is all knowledge. And so he asked learned people to believe that knowledge and truth are without end. And so against that backdrop, we have to think about, what does the struggle for liberation in South Africa involve? And some people want to say it's dharma or moksha, but for the Arya Samajas, struggle was about the immediate needs of the people. How did they go about doing that? What was their context in being able to suture and stitch the thinking of the Arya Samajas with the broader struggle for liberation in South Africa? These things sometimes drift apart, and sometimes there's a synergy that comes together. And as I've said before, when the indentured were brought after 1860, from the beginning, they were told they had no civilization, no culture. Their lives were contained in a contract, and they were given numbers, not names. But there were certain positives. When you came on the ship, you couldn't designate yourself a Brahmin. You couldn't designate yourself a particular caste and then isolate yourself. You were another coolie, human cargo brought to South Africa. And out of this, the indentured themselves responded creatively to this new context. The ship became the temple of Jagannath, casteless ship. And so, in many senses, the indentured were prefiguring what Gandhi and Nehru wanted for a post 1947 India. But given the fact of their being labored as cogs in a laboring machine with no future and no past, they were not given a chance to express their religion in any collective way. I've pointed out before, there are numerous stories in the archives of people trying to celebrate things like Diwali. But what the plantation boss would do would be literally smash the equipment. We take the case in the archives of Durga, who played a makeshift drum, but the plantation boss, R.W. Turner, came with an axe and broke it to pieces. And so when Swami Shankar Anand arrived on the shores of South Africa, he was aghast at the fact that the indentured and the merchant class and the passenger unions weren't allowed to openly express their religious leanings. In fact, the colonials labeled Hindu and Muslim marriages and put a stamp called heathen. That was a struggle. That winning of that battle of 1910, 50 years after the indentured came, was arguably one of the most significant turning points in the history, both of Hinduism, but a particular kind of orientation to the circumstances in which we found ourselves. And so it is not a coincidence that the Arya Samajas founded the Hindu Mahasabha. So when we think about politics, and this often befuddles people to drift away from that religious spine, let's try and think about periodization. And that's how normally we as historians and sociologists try to think about social relations. Why do we do that? Doesn't mean periods don't fold into each other. It gives us a sense of how new challenges arrive, and therefore new subjectivities and new ideologies and new ways of doing things have to take place. So what does that mean? That if we periodize the history of Indians in South Africa, then you got to think about 1860 to 1910, 1910 to 1947, 48, 48 to 1990, 1990 to the present. Why do we think about things in this way? Because the struggles that we are fighting in 1915, in 1920, were very different from the struggles that one was fighting in 1975. And so we don't understand these things. We won't get a grip about the importance of particular forms of organization and the kind of ideologies that were propagated. What do I mean by that? Between 1860 and 1910, we, as much as the indentured, the petitions, the Kuli commissions, Gandhi going to India, the green pamphlet, we were basically on our own. And Gandhi et al. Tried to mobilize India and the British Raj on our behalf. And the local Indians tried to claim rights as British citizens. This was the main part of the struggle. If we could claim to be part of empire because of the British Raj, then we would be entitled to full rights in South Africa. But with the coming of 1910, with the union of South Africa, with the betrayal of the British, the struggle started to change. And you see this in the languages, in the kinds of people who came, in the compromises as much as the resistances that were made. And we need to know this history because these times could arise again and even get distorted and abused by people as they rewrite history. So what happens in the 1920s? An incredible figure arrives, Sarojini Naidu. She comes with a new language, ahead of her times. She starts to talk about to white people in ways that they'd never heard before. Confrontational, arguing about equality, but she's also constantly talking about alliances with other people who are disenfranchised. African organizations, colored organizations. It's a breath of incredible fresh air for many people. And of course, she actually gets announced as the president of the South African Indian Congress, 1924, a long time ago. But it also relates, and when we talk about politics, India is starting to change. That by now, instead of just wanting to accept dominion status, people are starting to talk about Swaraj, independence of India, the quitting of the British. And this starts to change politics. In between this, the main struggle then becomes the struggle against repatriation. It's a hell of a struggle. It's constantly on the air. And if you read Uma Dupelya Mystery's brilliant book on Manilal Gandhi, entitled Gandhi's Prisoner, you'll see how this negotiation starts to take place. And now history will judge an incredible figure that arrives, Sastri. And Sastri is aghast at the conditions in which Indian South Africans are living. No high schools at all. Hardly any people in primary schools. This is already 1927-28. And through the Cape Town Agreement, you have both the uplift cause and repatriation. It's a compromise. But of course, they were playing a game. And out of the seminal intervention of the alien general and Srinivas Sastri, we didn't get Sastri College, 1929. Just think about that. You only get a high school emerging 70 years almost after the first Indians arrived in South Africa. So, and the Arya Samaj has become key to this because they are determined that the path to liberation is through knowledge. And knowledge both in its formal sense, but a challenge to the mainstream of Hinduism. And that is to cut yourself off from the social relations, to almost turn yourself into a permanently living ashram, as if you are excommunicated from society, is to find your personal salvation inside of Hinduism. And Siddhartha is very powerful in this because, you know, we read literature and we read fiction sometimes as if it's fiction. But if you read the debate, firstly, that Siddhartha has with his father about why he doesn't want to be a Brahmin anymore. And things are written on your own body. My father loved for me to scratch his back when he was having a bath. And one day, quite late, you know, I must have been 13, 14, I said, Dad, where's your Janoi? And he said, I don't wear things that strangle me anymore. And what he meant by that is that because my sister and I were born of a Tamil Christian mother and a Gujarati Brahmin, we were being discriminated against in small and subtle ways. And my father didn't think religion should be about that. It shouldn't be about cutting people off. And so if you read about how Siddhartha confronts his father, standing in one spot, staring, demanding that he leave the household of the Brahmin. But more powerfully, when we read these texts, we think through the debate he has both with the Buddha, but also after that with his best friend, Govinda. It is so powerful. And just think what Siddhartha says. And Siddhartha said, so he has lived for 60 years and has not reached nirvana. He will turn 70 and 80, and you and I, we will grow old and will continue to perform the exercises to meditate and fast. But nirvana will remain out of reach, both for him and for us. O Govinda, it seems to me that all of the samanas that exist, there's not one, not a single one who reached nirvana. We find consolations, we find numbness, we learn skills with which to deceive ourselves. But the essential, the path of paths, this we do not find. And I think we find in the journey, which is Siddhartha, journey through a river, we find that in the journey of Indian South Africans, we are finding ourselves all the time in this struggle. So there we are, isolated. We are trying to get Inuit rights, trying to fend off repatriation. No other oppressed group was going to be repatriated in numbers. This was a clear and present danger. They are horrible stories. of people who left. Like I've told you about Munigadu family. His wife died. He married, he remarried, he took his children back to India. He tried to come back because they saw India as a foreign country. Constantly, the British authorities said, once you leave, you can never come back. They arrive in Dar es Salaam. They walk to Mkuze, and then they finally get arrested. It was becoming a struggle to belong, but trying to use the power, the growing power of the Indian Congress movement inside of India to also advance and defend our cause. You see that in the trip that Dadu and Naika make in the 40s to India. But there's a break. And once India becomes independent, the struggle takes a new form. Once the 49 rights arrive on our laps, we need to think about activating the Doctors' Pact. And the 1950s is the crucible for the future of South African politics. Why is it it is crucial? Because not only were we confronting caste, not only were we confronting narrow forms of ritualism, we are now confronting the old racial boundaries in an alliance. And two remarkable people get produced in this period. They grow in this period. And that is Chief Albert Luthuli and Dr. Monty Naika. When you read the minutes of the Natal Indian Congress and the African National Congress at the time, you see the interaction, you see the deep friendships that try to merge. But this is not born over a table. This is born in a defiance campaign. When you read how people were prepared to march with a smile and go to jail together, you begin to understand the mind shift, the incredible sense of a struggle that is joined together. If you read about the Freedom Charter in 1955, and you see, while Daru couldn't go, you see these Gujarati women arriving at the Congress of the People in Kliptown, in saris. You realize that people were not only talking now. It wasn't just a Doctors' Pact where they were joining the fingertips. People were prepared to struggle. And in this period, then was born the Congress Alliance, the idea that Luthuli put on the table that in no actual struggle for national liberation as that happened, is that he talked about an inclusive nationalism against the tyranny of numbers. We're not for majoritarianism. And so we need to think about that period of struggle growing into becoming citizens for the first time, and the clampdown of the 60s, and then the re-emergence of the 70s. And so how do we think about the Arya Samaj through this period? What were its leaders doing? How were they thinking about society? Basically, they were following Pandit Vedalanka's words, and a constant thing about responding to your own country and the circumstances in which you find yourself. Now, why is that important? Why, if we link into the present, and I know there'll be lots of questions or discussion. Why is this important? What the simple thing that Pandit Vedalanka was writing. But let me also alert you in that book, which we should reprint. Ranjit Nobat, B.D. Lala, all write a set of brilliant pieces, including articles on the Vedas of South Africa. Because the Arya Samaj was saying that we need the knowledge contained in the Vedas according to the special needs of the community and the country and the circumstances at the time. Why is that important to us in the present period? There are people in South Africa, when you ask, when they tell you, the elections went well, they mean the elections in India, yet we're having elections here at the same time. When they say, oh, our cricket team did well, they mean the cricket team in India, not the cricket team here. When they talk about, oh, we Hindus are majority in India, and therefore everybody else must vacate or bow down to the dictates of our majoritarianism. When they tell you that secularism, to have a secular state, is a is wrong, that this has been forced upon us by Muslims and Christians. We have to ask ourselves the questions that they are transporting that politics into this place. What are the consequences of that? Do they know when they propagate that? Because if the majority of people in South Africa are Christian, then how would they respond to the fact that majoritarianism should fail? Everybody else are the stepchildren. Everybody else should shy away. So one must be careful. We are at a period where we have struggled through the late 19th and the whole of the 20th century in the present for freedom of religion. We have struggled to be able to pray to the gods we want, but also to be recognized in the most beautiful ways in South Africa. Whenever a president is inaugurated in South Africa, you'll have a Muslim, a Christian, and Hindus. Nobody's saying the Hindus are 2% of the population or even less, and therefore they shouldn't be there or they should speak less. Everybody is treated on par. These are the struggles that were fought, both by the Samajas, Hindus in general, by Indians, and in a non-racial alliance with African people. So we're at this edge where people are introducing what is a foreign ideology onto our backs. They also are rewriting history in the ways they want to. So the other day I was part of a conversation where they were attacking Nehru as a sellout. But if you look at Nehru's work in terms of the liberation of South Africa and the liberation struggle, it is an incredible set of speeches and activities that India took to its cost. And, you know, as Oswald Perot said, who's Nehru? Just another coolie, is an example of how that Congress government gave so much at the United Nations and elsewhere to put South Africa on the agenda. So we at a critical edge. I would only say two things in conclusion. I think, and the 1960 booklet doesn't do this, and forgive me, and I'm happy to be taken on. I think sometimes the Arya Samajas are accused of a kind of elitism, in that they look down upon certain Samajas, upon temples, upon rituals, upon the way people perform things like Kavati and so on. But these were very powerful things for our people. They were the things that brought people in collectives. They reimagined it in new ways, all our traditions. They reimagined in new ways to build a sense of defense. And I think one has to be much more careful in how one thinks through that, because these functions were also across castes and classes. So I think there is a sense that. The second thing I hear from people is that the Samajas can be, you know, feel themselves above society. They're an elite. These are the things one normally. But my own experiences, it's completely the opposite. If ever a grouping has been close to the people, who is constantly rethinking and reimagining its role in society according to changing circumstance, then it's been the Arya Samajas. And for that, I think all of us find a home in this kind of thinking. And so to be an Arya Samajas is to be liberated from dogma. To be an Arya Samajas is to think beyond the confines of gender divides and to constantly want women especially to become priests and to be fundamental to things like the Havan. It has been pioneering in that respect. So in terms of the way you conduct yourself personally, the way you give of yourself, the way you think about society between the human and nature constantly as intertwined is powerful. And then in that sense, the struggles of the Samajas to produce a Hinduism that is liberatory was stitched onto a South African struggle that was designed to overcome racial and gender oppression at its base. New challenges await us. But if we survive the 20th century, and the Arya Samajas are part of the pantheon of liberation heroes in this country, then I think we need to have a much more open discussion of what this new decade holds for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashwin. That was really powerful. Okay, so this is open now for discussion. I see Bridge has put in a point on the chat. Bridge, I'm sure the committee, the executive will look at what you're suggesting and look at the publication and see what they would be able to do. Yes, it's now open for discussion. So please, can I see who would like to say something, who would like to question Ashwin? I expected Ashwin to be a lot more provocative, but Ashwin's raised a point that Arya Samaj is elitist. And if you look at old pictures, Ashwin, you will see that basically all Arya Samaj people were suited and booted in those early days. Really interesting. Okay. One of the points that Ashwin is deeply bringing us to look at is this issue of how do we handle the challenges that we currently face by tracing all the things that people have had in the past. Sindhu, please go ahead.
Karuna, namaste, Dr. Desai, namaste to everybody listening. I just wanted to add a little bit. I know time is always an issue, and listening to Professor Desai speak over the years, it's often difficult to put a lot into a little bit of time. I just thought maybe you'd want to touch a little bit, Prof, on the Aryan Benevolent Home. When you speak of the values that the Arya Samaj brought to the table in South Africa, maybe about the story that we all know about 1918, when D.G. Satyadev back in the day saw a policeman beat up a homeless Indian, or a homeless Indian, but a person was forced to spend the night in a public toilet. You know, and the Arya Samaj at that time was at the forefront, it's more than 100 years ago, of organizing a structure, a civil society structure, to put together this thing that has become a legacy of the Samaj, which is the Aryan Benevolent Home. You know, as a practical application of Vedic principles, or the principles of the Arya Samaj. And maybe you could touch on some of the tribulations that those early pioneers of the Aryan Benevolent Home sort of had to face, and the challenges they faced. Thanks.
Thank you. Ashwin, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, you know, look, you know, I did a lot of work in Chatsworth, and you know, it's a double-edged sword into the present. I think we all know that history is that our community became very mobile, and the idea that the old always stayed in an extended family was just not facing reality. And in that sense, for us in the 1990s, many of us were very humbled by the work of the Aryan Benevolent Home. And but we need to turn the focus and to say, how are we thinking about old people? What are the alternatives? In 1918, one of those alternatives was having to start to build these old age homes. But what does that mean about the value of life? I say this because, you know, Dr. Ramros was giving us blankets and so on, some things that happened in Unit 2 and Unit 3. And we were going in and out at that time. I think it was about 2002 or 2003. And I asked one of the people who work at the Benevolent Home, every Saturday there used to be an old man there dressed at the exit. And then I asked the people, why is he standing there? They said he thinks he's been told that his family might come and pick him up and take him to Joburg. And he's waiting for them, but they will never come. And I think when we talk about new challenges, what are we saying about those values of family? We're not saying that people should be encumbered, but how are we treating the old? Are we just going to immediately there's a fall, want to book them into the Aryan benefit or the Kendra? Is this the way we want to conduct ourselves? What are the Samajas saying about those things? How are we supporting those people? Because once we ourselves put our family or somebody from the community in those places, what kind of role are we playing in nurturing a community spirit around them? So these are challenges we face. I don't know the answer, and maybe I think about it a lot because I'm 66 now, and I'm trying to book my own place in one of these room in one of those places.
Thank you, Ashwin. Sindhu, just to say that our next lecture on Back to the Vedas, the title is The Aryan Benevolent Home. And so our next speaker in the series will cover what the Arya Samaj did on the social issues. Okay, are there any further questions? Please go ahead, Bridge.
Thank you, Karuna. Excellent, Ashwin, as usual. I just wanted to connect the liberation team with the ABH. In the 80s, Mr. Ambaras allowed activists to meet the ABH, and as you know, in that era, it's such a risk because the security police was always on people's trail, etc., and they always wanted to get a batch of people, not one. They wanted a whole group of people that they could get hold of. And in 1990, and I stand to be corrected by other people in the chat who have got a better memory than me, when Mandela met the activists in Durban, he went to the ABH. We all were invited to the ABH. I reckon it was towards the end of 1990. And he started off by acknowledging Mr. Ramboros. So I think some of these connections with the struggle history and obviously the recognition of what places like the ABH and the leadership. And Mr. Ramboros was then the president of the ABH and the president of Arya Samaj South Africa. And I think the last point that Ashwin concluded on, I'm not expecting a response, Ashwin, it's just food for thought because of the multiple hats some of us wear. The divisions that are coming into our community should be of concern to all of us because it's got serious consequences in an era where there's a contestation of identities and places. And you now have chants of Hambakaya in India. And we got these opportunities to get involved in the national dialogue, etc., to start carving out a space again in a non-racial society. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridge. Ila, please go ahead.
Thanks, Karuna, and thank you, Ashwin, for that enlightening discussion. From my own experience with the Arya Samaj, I found that in the past we used to be very divided, even though we were Hindus. But there were Gujarati Hindus and Tamil Hindus and Hindi Hindus. Arya Samaj brought everyone together. So that's the one thing that perhaps Ashwin, through the sociological aspect of bringing people together under one umbrella. The second thing is, there was a lot of different interpretations of the Hindu religion. What do ceremonies mean? Whether it is simple, ceremonies like marriage or observing particular, auspicious days and so on. And my experience was that Arya Samaj explained everything. Every ritual that you perform, even in the Havan, it was explained why it had some scientific explanation. And for me, that was a very, enlightening thing, because it brought the entire Hindu religion into perspective through this, through the explanations. Because prior to that, what we found is people just did things out of superstition. And one thing about Arya Samaj was that there was no superstition. There's no good day and bad day. Every day is an auspicious day. Things like that, all the ceremonies that you perform, that women can perform these ceremonies. All those progressive ideas, I think, there needs to be a sort of presentation of that. And, through the research and that, I think it would help a lot to bring the whole idea of what Arya Samaj stands for and what it has done to bring people together. So perhaps, Ashwin, if you could dwell on that, I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ida. Ashwin, any points
Yeah,
you'd like?
one of the to take it to another, one of the fantastic things of both in the Mahabharata and in the Vedas, which I know now with the national dialogue, is so much of the written word is about a conversation and a debate. And, that's where we are in the country. I think sometimes in religion, it's this or that. It's the, it's like hadith, right? It's that kind of thing. And I think we're at that stage in the country where we are wanting dialogue in a way, and we want a contestation of ideas. But I see there's a question coming, and then maybe I can return.
Sure. Nirod, would you like to speak? And after Nirod, would Siva like to speak? Go ahead, Nirod.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. I think the Arya Samaj demystified Hinduism in terms of this ritual and caste-based and all of those systems that existed in South Africa with this Muharram and all of that kind of thing. And we all know the story, right? And the liberation struggle, there are very few movements that align itself with the liberation struggle in any system in South Africa. And I know that Arya Samaj had done its part, right, in the liberation struggle, right, over and over. It pinned its colors to the mast and it did its thing, right? And I think, because I worked in the areas, I know. The Hindu Mahasabha was like not interested, non-Khmer. They were just not interested in pinning its colors to the mast. And the Arya Samaj were forthright in doing so, unlike any other Hindu organization, right? And I think that ought to be recorded, because we did pin our colors to this from the beginning, that we were liberation, and being a socially reformist organization in South Africa, our role was defined. And I'm proud to be a member of the Arya Samaj, because we did that. And I think I was hoping to hear more of that with Swami Bhavani Dayal and all of those who did all that work with the liberation movement. And that's why I joined this meeting today, to hear that, because we did that. We harbored at the Aryan Malevolent Home people who are underground. And it's not recorded. It's not recorded. But we harbored them. And I think that is, I know I worked in the AIDS, and that is important that we did that. And I take pride in that movement. And I hope that Ashwin would put that down in whatever writings he's doing, that we did that. That we did that. We pinned our colors to the mast when the Mahasabha, which was founded by our Swami Shankaracharya, wasn't taking any stance. They were neutral. Under Prana Lakani and under Ashwin, they were neutral. I worked with them. I know. So we need to record the history that Arya Samaj did. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nirod. Siva, please go ahead. Siva, please.
Thanks, Ash, for again challenging all of us in these very difficult and challenging times that we face as South Africans of Indian origin. And for me, the Samajas have no doubt undeniably played a magnificent role in the struggle for human rights and democracy. For me, as a young activist in Tongat, in the year 1977, a Samajist lands in our town, taking up a job as the first community worker of the Tongat Child and Family Welfare Society. This young social scientist, who graduated from the Remington University in Canada, one Vishwapriya Sivaprasad, who later becomes the son-in-law of Pandit Nardev Vedalanka, played a critical role in community mobilization and organization. Our introduction and into community mobilization and organization and our political thinking and spiritual consciousness was shaped by this Samajist. And here was an individual who, armed with a social science degree, became really a catalyst in a local community from 1977 to 1982. Whilst we as young Turks were engaging with and grappling with economic exploitation in the sugar fields in the North Coast, where our parents gave their blood, sweat, and tears to, it was the young Vishwapriya Sivaprasad gave context to our struggle. Samajist, coming from the Arya Samaj, he taught us about the art and science, really, of understanding religion and higher levels of spiritual consciousness. And for that, we, as activists in Tongat, were eternally grateful for the early beginnings, really, of sharpening the saw, as Stephen Covey would say, sharpening the saw so that we could become agents for change as the struggle unfolded for social justice and democracy in our country. So for me, I think that much of my thinking and my spiritual consciousness derived from the early learnings and teachings of your spiritual founder Dayanand Saraswati, and I found a lot of resonance in liberation theology from a Hindu perspective, and I'm eternally grateful for the role that the Samajists played, and it sprung up a plethora of activists from Pietermaritzburg and beyond. And for that, I want to acknowledge that Nirod Bramdo and his family were part of that and later became an integral part of the social movements, calling for fundamental change. Thank you, Ash.
Thank you, Sava. Selvin, please go ahead. Sindhu, I've recognized your hand, but I thought it's better to give new people a chance. Selvin, please unmute and go ahead.
Good evening, Karuna, and good evening to everybody, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Ashwin, I really think we ought to be challenging the writing before the organized Hinduism that you speak of. I really think that we've got to look at plantation literature in terms of organized Hinduism, especially as far as the village traditions. I'm certain the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, the Tirupuggal, Tevaram was evident in the plantations. I think the organization is not in the archives and not spoken of the way it ought to be spoken of, because we must debunk the organizational aspect. And there certainly was organization well before a structured organization that happened in the 1900s. And I think it's linked to what you said at the conclusion, and particularly to what Ella had spoken about ritual and how the Arya Samaj, from what it set out to do in removing ritual, needs to embrace it now in the 21st century when we look at re-looking at Kavadi, Mariamman, and Mohoram, which is no longer in existence here in South Africa. But these are aspects that we really need to rewrite, because that's the part that Hilda Cooper spoke so brilliantly in her book, and that's the field research that we really need to start re-looking to, because it speaks to the organization that was actually on the plantations, on the ships, that happened long before the formal organization. So yeah, that's the challenge I think we need to do.
Thank you very much. Sindhu, please go ahead. Sindhu, please unmute and go ahead. You have a second question. Ashwin, this is the first time everybody's so excited to still give questions. Sindhu, we're giving you a chance to make another contribution to the debate.
I think he's muted.
I think so, yes. Okay, we normally finish at 8 o'clock, and we 1 minute to 8. Sindhu,
can I just ask a question if the other speaker is not coming in?
please do come in, Hans.
Okay, namaste, Ashwin ji. It's so nice to meet you. I just a few comments. You touch on the very important aspects of my study, and I have lots of interesting questions which I wouldn't be able to ask here. But can we make some arrangements where I can meet you and we can discuss this further?
Sure. Karuna is my teacher.
Wow, okay. I'm now your secretary. That's good. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans.
Karuna, sorry, I've now fixed my tech problem. I'm unmuted, if I
Good.
may. Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm just also putting my video. I don't know if you people can read this. It's a very old, you can see it's an original piece of paper. I'm just going to read this very quickly. It's dated 21st November 1986. It says, "Dear people, namaste. If you have any surplus bread, cake, and other types of non-liquid vegetarian foods, please hand over to our caretaker Daniel, or leave in our dining hall for distribution to people. Thanking you. I remain yours in service, K. Badal, Admin Secretary, Arya Pratinidhi Sabha, South Africa." There's a couple of reasons. Number one, this is when I joined formally the Arya Samaj as a member, and I joined the Arya Youth League. There's two things about that document that I just want to bring. Number one, in today's day and age, when we look at social activity, fundraising, doing things for our community in whatever way, sadly, for whatever reasons, there's a long process. There's a ton of paperwork. There's organization structures, registration, compliance, and a whole lot of things. Mr. Badal, who I think is an icon of the Arya Samaj, I think Abhin Bhai is here. I'm going to send him a copy of this. This is how the Arya Samaj did grassroots work. People walking past APS in town, which was just behind Beater Street, where everybody had to take a bus. That's what they would do, collect and that. And the other thing that I was hoping, perhaps I know time's out, but that I was hoping we would have touched on in this lecture, is that in that time period, myself personally, as a young lightie, going to APS, we weren't fully aware at the time, and we knew some things, but obviously as time went on, we learned about all the shenanigans that used to happen in the basement of the hall, Aryan Hall, where struggle activists, we spoke, wax lyrical, Siva Bhaiji, about Vishwa Priya. Nirod Bhaiji spoke about the Samaj from the earlier times. In my lifetime, me being there in APS Hall, not knowing at that time, later on becoming aware of all of these things, that the Arya Samaj was, as Nirod had said, flag colors to the mast. The Samaj had no qualms about letting all of these struggle activities take place in their premises. We used to have youth league meetings, and sometimes at last minute, often Mr. Badal will phone the secretary of the youth league and change our meetings so it would coincide. We didn't know at the time. But it would coincide at the time of meetings when senior struggle activists, people 10 years older than me, Ashwin ji, in your age, would meet there, and this larger crowd and more people and young people milling around was there to sort of confuse the police. I know the number of times that we were sitting in council chambers, looking out, having youth league meetings, Ved Niketan meetings with police vans downstairs. I was hoping that perhaps with the topic being the Arya Samaj and struggle for liberation, that perhaps we could have touched a little bit more on not just the principles, but some of the actual historical events, to sort of record the people, the activities, their contribution. Abhin Bhai is here. I saw him on the list of participants. He was a few years my senior, and I know through them sort of a little bit as the chain went up of all the things they used to get up to in the basement and under the cover of Samaj meetings. Ved Niketan, Arya Youth League in particular, I know that I used to attend, and at the same time, really, that is, we watch spy movies, we watch James Bond and all of these things. These things were happening in Carlisle Street. I was not aware of the time, but right on our noses, and that is so amazing. It was like Jason Bourne, really. When I tell my kids that, they laugh, but they don't realize that at that time, it was such a brutal time that they lived in, that these people, a few years my senior, were doing all of these things. And that, I think, is a contribution of the Samaj that must be recorded for posterity and for history. And as a part of one of the aspects, one of the numerous aspects of the collective struggle for independence in South Africa. And that, as we know, our struggle was contribution, they call the ANC the big church, of everybody in there. So this was one part, I think, that must be recorded for posterity in some way. Sadly, because at that time, with the media restrictions and no free press, etc., all of this could not and wasn't recorded as properly before all of you all died. I'm just saying, putting it out there for a word. Just saying.
Thank you very much, Sindhu. Ramesh, do you want? We're going to give you a short time. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Good evening, colleagues. And since you're talking about history and the recording thereof, I would like to relate a story, and we talk about Mr. Badal here, which I relate to Reshma and Abhin all along, often. In the 1980s, 1986 in particular, and 87, in Carlisle Street, at the old Hindu Tamil school building, there was a school called Pambili High School. And that school was formed by Fatima Mir, to basically educate children from the townships learners from the townships that were expelled from the schools through political activity. We started the school in June 1986, and we had an overwhelming success of it. The word spread that the children were being educated there properly and so forth. And in 1987, we had something like 3,000 applicants for a school for as enrollment, and the old Hindu Temple building could only accommodate about 600 odd learners. And we approached Mr. Badal in Carlisle Street for use of their hall to teach these children, and this needs to be recorded. And without batting an eyelid, without raising issues, but then also we must remember, juxtaposed to this, there was major persecution by the security police. And that's another story that needs to be told also. And, Mr. Badal graciously allowed us use of the APS hall to teach these kids, which we did, through 1987 until the security branch intervened and the school fell apart. But although it still exists, but that story needs to be told, needs to be recorded. That in times of struggle where other religious organizations were not prepared to commit themselves to the struggle, to commit themselves to threats by the security police. The APS, through Mr. Badal, was brave enough to accommodate these children who were expelled from their schools through political activity. I'll leave it at that. It's a longer story, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ramesh. Please, can you leave your details in the chat? We'd like to follow up with you. Friends, historians don't write the history. They only do the research. And because they're good writers, they put it together. What is important for getting the true stories out and all the details that we're all speaking about, the unwritten parts of the history of the Arya Samaj needs to come through. So I think I'm going to basically ask Ashwin right now if he's got any concluding words, and then I'm going to hand over to the president of the Arya Samaj for his concluding words, because all of this rich history, I think, is not known by the current generation, and also by the next, we need the next generation to know that. Perhaps I could just add that in Pietermaritzburg, the Vedram Sabha, the Plesisla Arya Samaj, the Reistop Arya Samaj, all supported the work that we were doing in the struggle. Vedram Sabha gave their venues very openly for things. Plesisla assisted with the civic movements, the ratepayers movements, and particularly the Reistop Arya Samaj often protected some of us from the security branch harassment by not revealing who we were. Ashwin, over to you.
Yeah, look, the history of the Arya Samaj needs to be written. I'm just reading letters and the memoirs of Bhavani Dayal, and quite fascinating. A lot of the stuff was not in the biography, and I am in touch with his family, and I think it's a seminal moment. However, there's two things I want to say. No organization in South Africa is an immaculate conception. And I find it a bit untoward when people start to get competitive about these things. Swami Shankaranand himself engaged in quite a huge battle with Gandhi, withdrawing Hindu traders from the market. The Arya Samaj was all over the place in terms of its own ideology. And so that history will be written, and yes, they might have given venues and so on, fine, and I'm sure people will write that history. maybe some of us are battling two things, and I'm certainly going to contribute to the Bhavani Dayal, which I find an incredibly underwritten and fascinating and laudatory man. And I'm glad people talk about Mr. Badal, because he was one of the people who opened his heart to me in a way when Prime Minister Vajpayee came to South Africa, and he really drew me in and he made me feel part of a team over there. But I think many of us are saying, what is our two things? People want hide behind organizations. The Arya Samaj did this, the Hindu Mahasamaj didn't do that, the Tamil Federation did this. But what were they as individuals doing? And, I was thinking, Pandit Vedalanka, and many of us are battling in the context of the present. What do these histories mean in the present? Is the Arya Samaj saying something beautiful and new in the context of South Africa now, both to the fights that are going on within Hinduism, which are incredible? A lot of people in this list have not come under those criticisms and poisonous vendettas that are conducted. They abstracted themselves from this, so it's easy for them to talk. But this is a real and present danger about how people are being attacked, who are seen as not part of Hindu Vata and so on. But Pandit, maybe some of us are battling in another way. And Pandit Vedalanka said, the Vedic mantra shows that the road to progress, but whether the person treads it slowly or fast will depend on the individual. And I think a lot of us have to search within ourselves about what our role in the present context is. How are we playing a role in which we're deepening our democracy, worrying about if you look at the MK manifesto, it says that the constitution must be abolished in the 1996. Read the manifesto. It must be overridden by parliamentary prerogative and majoritarianism. But there's a contradiction, because they also want our house chiefs and tribal leaders. So we're in a different context. Do the Samajas what they're going to provide a hall so people can meet, or they have a few underground meetings? No. What is the Samaja's teachings from what Siva was saying about responding to degradation and oppression in the context of the immediate? Have they some? Maybe they don't have anything to say. What are they saying about the fights that are going on inside of Hinduism in South Africa as we speak? Do have their line of march? So what happened? They fought the struggle against apartheid and they disappeared? No, they have a lot to say about the present, given that history of struggle. And I think that's what many of us are grappling with. And it'd be nice to see when the Samajas do come out with that intervention. I think one of the things they would be supporting is the national dialogue, which seems to me an incredible way in which Hinduism can speak to what does dialogue mean. Even Gandhi himself, when he wrote stuff, did it as a Socratic principle about a conversation between people, and that's what the Vedas often react to. And if you read the section by Ranji Nobat in the 1960 Hinduism in South Africa, he brilliantly lays this out. So yes, maybe to conclude by saying yes, those histories will be written, but I would suggest a organizational chauvinism would be the antithesis of both Hinduism and Samaja's philosophy.
Thank you very much, Ashwin, for coming through and for speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, our next lecture will be on the 16th of July on the Aryan Benevolent Home, and it would be by Dr. Shamim Mahabir. With that, I'd like to hand over to Pandit Kiran.
Thank you, Karuna. Thank you, Dr. Desai, for this wonderful presentation. It also gave us so much of food for thought. But what was interesting was the response from the participants that came through in so many different ways. What was beautiful was the acknowledgement of past activists and also people that were involved in shifting towards a positive change in this country. We thank you for creating this dialogue and also the interest in talking about what the future holds for us. It is something that you mentioned now, is that we need to start looking at it very, very intensely, because we have a very negative side to our organizations when certain mentions are made in terms of struggles that are taking place internationally. Then you get the right wingers that will come forward and accuse us of making statements. Then you have the left wingers that will come in and say, yes, we're not doing enough. So it does create, I think it's healthy to have these dialogues and these debates, but ultimately we in the Arya Samaj are guided by our history, the founding fathers, Swami Dayanand Saraswati, and I think the most important thing is the 10 principles of the Arya Samaj is a universal document that it has withstood the test of time and can be used at all times. Thank you once again, Dr. Desai, for your wonderful input. And in concluding, I would like to just ask all our participants that we pray for you to have a healthy future, and also for all of us that we're here this evening, we conclude with prayer. Om Asatoma Satgamaya Tamasorma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. O Almighty God, lead us from untruth to truth, from darkness to light, save us from death and lead us to immortality. Sarve bhavantu sukhina, sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukhamapnuyat. Almighty God, you may all be happy in your presence. May all be free from misery, and may all realize goodness, and may no one suffer pain. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Namaste. Thank you, Karuna.
Thank you very much, Kiran Bhai. Namaste.
Namaste.